Hello and welcome everyone to our weekly session titled Latest in Bitcoin Tech, where we go through the Bitcoin Optech weekly newsletter. And this week we will be going through the year in review special newsletter that was published on 20th of December because it was a very elaborate newsletter. We decided to cover it in two sessions initially and then three sessions because we weren't able to cover all the months or at least noteworthy segments in all of the months. So we decided to split it into three sections, and today is going to be part 3 and the final part of it. So let's see what we have in store this week. The Bitcoin Optech newsletter number 334, published on 2024 year in review special, published on December 2024. December 20th, 2024. And last time if you were with us, then we covered this Hyperion Network Simulator in August. We covered full RBF, and then we stopped at Bolt 12 offers. This week we'll probably start from here and then see what else can we cover. Maybe we can cover a little bit of cluster mempool, a P2P, a relay, and see what other topics we can cover in 60 minutes. Okay, what is this? Mining interfaces, block withholding, and share validation cost. A new mining interface for Bitcoin Core saw development with the goal of supporting miners using the Stratum V2 protocol that can be set to allow each miner to select their own transactions. However, Anthony Towns noted earlier in the year that independent transaction selection could raise share validation costs for mining pools. If those pools responded by limiting validation, it could allow an invalid shares attack that's similar to the well-known block withholding attack. A 2011 proposed solution to withholding attacks was discussed, although it would require a challenging consensus change. Okay, let's just try and understand this prima facie, and then we can deal or dig into it in more detail. All right. So I don't need to explain to people what Bitcoin mining is. I'm assuming that everybody who is here knows what Bitcoin mining is and how it works, right? Um, Currently, what happens is the majority of the mining pools, they create their own block templates. They create their own block templates, and they ask the miners that are indulging in pool mining with those mining pools to work on the template that they have created. So let's say there's a pool A. Pool A will use its own node to create a block template. Okay, which we also call as candidate block. And then it will ask all the miners that participate in pool mining with pool A to mine their own templates, meaning it's the pool, it's the central pool that has the authority to choose the candidate block, that has the prerogative to decide what transactions will get included in a block. The miners don't, right? What this does is that it's pretty obvious that this leads to centralization, right? Because there is one central entity that is deciding what transactions are going to be included in the block and what transactions are not going to be included in a block, right? And if three or four major mining pools control two-thirds of the hash rate, then it's eventually three or four big players deciding what the Bitcoin's blockchain looks like, right, or should look like, which is not a very healthy situation. All right. So there are certain protocols, there are certain softwares that give the miners the opportunity to create their own block templates. Okay, that give the miners the opportunity to create their own block templates. They act basically as an intermediator or a mediator between the miner and the mining pool, such that the miner creates a block using its own node, and then that block which the miner has created is sent to the pool for validation. Is sent to the pool for validation every single time the miner finds a share. The miner will share that share. Okay, this share here basically means a block that is eligible for a reward. A block that is eligible for a reward is known as a share. So every time you are mining, you find a block that has a difficulty which is above a certain threshold difficulty defined that by that mining pool, then you've created a share. Okay, what's a share basically? So we all know what's the network difficulty, right? What's the network difficulty? When you are mining, if you find a nonce which is less than the difficulty target, okay, then that is a valid block. Okay, that is a valid block. But you cannot. I mean, how mining pools work is that mining pools don't only pay the miners when they find a valid block, right? Because the chances of a miner finding a valid block is very little. So they stipulate a threshold. Let's say 1,000 is the difficulty of mining a block. So the pool will stipulate a difficulty that is 1/1,000. That is very low. Okay, that's 1/1,000. That's like 0.1% of the actual network difficulty, and the miners mining pool will say to the miners that, hey, if you can find a block which has a nonce that reaches the difficulty level which is even 0.1% of the network difficulty, we will pay you X amount of money, right? So what's a valid share? Every single time a miner mines a block that is above the difficulty level that the pool has set. Okay, so even though it's not a valid block, you cannot append it to the blockchain, but at least it has done some work for which the mining pool will compensate it. Okay, so that is known as a share. Okay, so every single time the miner generates the share using its own node, okay, using its own node, that the mining pool will reward the miner for that share, right? And there are certain tools that allow the miners to create their own block templates instead of relying on the block templates that have been created by the mining pool. Okay, one such software is Stratum V2. All right. Now this prima facie sounds very good because, like I said, we don't want a centralization. We don't want three or four people or three or four entities sitting and deciding what the Bitcoin blockchain looks like, right? The decision making in Bitcoin should be decentralized. So here we have today tools, more than one of them, that make that possible. That you can sit at your home with a miner and create your own block template, right? But this also comes with its own share of trade-offs. This also comes with its own share of trade-offs. What are those trade-offs? We look into those trade-offs uh, in more detail. Okay, so let's read this paragraph. It'll elaborate in more detail what I tried to cover in a more succinct manner, and also it'll mention what trade-offs come with uh, template creation, right? Because prima facie, it looks like it's the best thing and it can have no downsides. It can have no trade-offs. It's a great idea that instead of allowing a centralized mining pool to decide what transactions go into the block and what transactions don't go into the block, now the individual miners, and there are hundreds and thousands of miners all over the world, each miner can create its own block template, right? So the Bitcoin blockchain, the decision making with regards to Bitcoin blockchain is not centralized anymore. What drawback, what trade-off could it have? It does have a few trade-offs. What are those trade-offs? Let's look into those trade-offs. So Anthony Towns posted to a Bitcoin dev mailing list to discuss the block withholding attack, a related invalid shares attack, and potential solutions to both attacks, including disabling client work selection in Stratum V2 and oblivious shares. All right. So pool miners are paid for submitting units of work called shares, each of which is a candidate block that contains a certain amount of proof of work, right? What does this mean? It means that every single time a miner is mining or hashing a candidate block, if it reaches a certain difficulty level which is stipulated by the pool, that difficulty level is known as shares, it will be compensated by that pool. It will be compensated by that pool. Okay. The expectation is that a known portion of those shares will also contain enough proof of work to make their candidate block eligible for inclusion on the most proof of work chain. For example, if the share proof of work target is 1,000th of the valid block proof of work, the pool expects to pay for 1,000 shares for every valid block it produces on average. Okay, so let's say that the difficulty to mine a block on the Bitcoin network right now is 1,000. Okay, it's an arbitrary number. Let's say that the difficulty of mining a block on the Bitcoin blockchain right now is 1,000. Okay, the pool will tell you that, hey, even if you mine a block that is difficulty or that has a difficulty that attains a difficulty of one or more, we'll pay you. If it's 100, we'll pay you. If it's 500, we'll pay you. If it's 800, we'll pay you. If it's 900, we'll pay you. If it's 1,000, then obviously find a block. But even if it's one, we'll pay you, right? Because if the pool pays the miner only when the miner finds a valid block, then the miner might keep on hashing for his entire lifespan and will never find a block, right? So to make mining more profitable, or to make it less to make the profits of mining less variant, right? Like to reduce the variance, what happens is that the pools set a threshold that, okay, fine, even if you don't find a valid block, but at least you do some work, we'll pay you. We'll pay you, we'll compensate you for doing that some work. What's that some work? Let's assume that if you have to mine a block, let's assume that the difficulty of the Bitcoin network is 1,000. Even if you attain a block that has a difficulty of 1, okay, of 1, that's 0.1%, then also we'll pay you. All right. So, for example, if the share proof of work target is 1/1000th of the valid proof of work target, the pool expects to pay 4,000 shares for every valid block it produces on average. A classic block withholding attack occurs when a pool miner does not submit the 1 in 1,000 share that produces the valid block, but does submit the other 999 shares that are not valid blocks. This allows the miner to be paid for 99.9% of their work, but prevents the pool from earning any income from that miner. Okay. Now, let us remember that the pool will only get paid when the miner finds a valid block. Okay. So if the difficulty level is 1,000, if the miner mines a block that has a difficulty 1, the miner gets paid. The difficulty is okay, but the pool does not get paid. If the miner mines a block of difficulty 100, the miner gets paid, but the pool does not get paid. If the miner mines a block of difficulty 500, the miner gets paid, but the pool does not get paid. If the miner mines a block of difficulty 999, still the miner gets paid, but the pool does not get paid. It is only when the miner mines a block of difficulty 1,000 and above, that is when the miner and the pool both get paid. Okay, so the miner is getting paid every single time the miner mines a block that has a valid proof of work, okay, a valid share, it gets paid. What's a valid share here? In our example, it's 1. So anywhere between 1 to 999, the miner gets paid, but the pool does not get paid. The pool will only get paid when the difficulty achieved is 1,000. Okay. Now, how a miner can exploit the situations? A miner, every single time the miner is mining a candidate block and it produces a block, or it mines a block that has a difficulty between 1 to 999, it will share it with the miner, with the mining pool. Okay. But when it's 1,000 and above, it will not. So a miner is mining a candidate block and it produces a block with difficulty, let's say 500. It'll furnish it to the mining pool and say, hey, I found a block of difficulty 500, pay me. Okay, it finds a block of difficulty 200. It'll again show it to the mining pool and say, hey, pay me, because it's above 1, right? If it's 999, again, it'll broadcast it to the mining pool and say, hey, pay me, I'm eligible. But when it finds a block of difficulty 1,000, okay, 1,000, which is a valid block, which is the network difficulty, which makes the block be eligible to be appended to the blockchain. Okay, which is when the pool gets paid, the miner will intentionally hide that. The miner will not share it with the pool. Why? Because the miner gets compensated in equal proportion irrespective of the difficulty of the block. If the miner mines a block that has difficulty 1, it still gets paid X amount. If it mines a block that is 500 difficulty, it still gets paid X amount. And if it mines a block that's difficulty 1,000 and above, the miner still gets paid X amount. All right. So every single time a miner finds a valid share in pooled mining, they get the same amount of money. They get the same amount of compensation. It does not vary, even if they find a valid block or an invalid block. Okay, as long as it's a valid share, they get paid the same amount of money. It's only the pool. It's only the pool that gets paid when the difficulty is greater than the network difficulty. So what the miner can do is, every single time the miner finds a share which is a valid share, but it is less than the network difficulty, it will broadcast it and take its compensation. But every single time the miner mines a valid block which has a proof of work that is greater than the network difficulty, it will hide that block. It will not share it with the mining pool. What happens in this situation? Every single time the miner mines a block that has a share which it is eligible to be compensated for, it will share it and take its share of rewards, but it will deprive the pool of getting the pool share of rewards. Every single time the pool is eligible for a reward, the miner will not broadcast the block to it. And every single time only the miner is eligible for the reward, the miner will broadcast that block to it. What possibly could be a reason for this? It's basically somebody who's trying to harm the mining pool, right? If you want to harm a mining pool, start mining with them. Okay, every single time you find a valid share that is below the network difficulty, broadcast it, take your share of money. Every single time you mine a block which is a valid block, which can be appended to the blockchain, which is above the difficulty level of the network, don't broadcast it to the miner and deprive the miner of its profits. So you keep on profiting every time you create a valid share, but the miner never gets its share of rewards because you're not broadcasting the blocks that have a difficulty which is greater than the network difficulty. Okay, this is known as a block withholding attack. So anytime you hear this term block withholding attack, you hopefully now know what a block withholding attack is. A classic block withholding attack occurs when a pool miner does not submit the 1 in 1,000 share that produces a valid block, but does submit the other 999 shares that are not valid blocks. This allows the miner to be paid for 99.9% of their work, but prevents the pool from earning any income from that miner, right? A rival pool might also do it, right? So there's pool A and there's pool B. Okay, both of them are rivals. Pool A might start mining with pool B. Okay, obviously without telling them that hey, you're rivals. You just need to set up a few ASICs and start mining with your rival pool. Okay, every single time you find a valid share, you ask your rival pool to compensate you. But every single time you find a block that is above the network difficulty, you don't broadcast it to your rival pool. So you get paid by the rival pool, but you deprive the rival pool of the Coinbase reward, right? So this is basically a kind of attack where uh, where your only intention is to harm the mining pool. Okay, your only intention is to harm the mining pool. Okay, now, Stratum V2 includes an optional mode that pools can enable to allow miners to include a different set of transactions in their candidate blocks than what the pool suggests mining. The pool miner can even attempt mining transactions that the pool doesn't have. This can make it expensive for the pool to validate miner shares. Each share can contain up to several megabytes of transactions that the pool has never seen before, all of which may be designed to be slow to validate. That can easily overwhelm a pool's infrastructure, affecting its ability to accept shares from honest users. Okay. Now, one other drawback of or a trade-off of miners creating their own templates is what? When the pool is creating the template, the pool knows all the transactions, right? It is not possible that the miner will ever share a block with the pool that contains a transaction that the pool is not aware of, because every single time your node sees a new transaction, your node has to perform validation checks on that transaction. But if you create a candidate block and you share it with the miners as the pool, if you create a candidate block and you share it with the miners and you ask the miners to mine it, every single time the miners will return the share to you. They will let you know. They will make you aware of their proof of work. You don't have to validate those transactions again because you're already aware of those transactions. You are the one who created a candidate block using those transactions and shared it with the miner. So you're already aware of it. So every single time the miners that you're working with furnish to you their proof of work, their share. You don't have to validate the transactions in those blocks again and again and again because you're the one who's created that block. Okay. But when you are working with hundreds or maybe even thousands of miners, each of those miners creating their own templates and then broadcasting it to you, there is a high possibility that those templates that your miners are broadcasting to you might contain transactions which you are not aware of, right? Because your mempool policies might differ. As a mining pool, your mempool policies might differ from the mempool policies of the miners who are mining with you, right? You might allow certain transactions in your node. The miners that you are working with might not allow that those transactions. You might be using a different client. They might be using a different client. You might be using a different version. They might be using a different version. You might be having different node and mempool policies. They might be having different node and mempool policies. And what if you're working with hundreds and thousands of miners, all of them having a different looking mempool? Every single time to validate a share, you will have to validate that the block has valid transactions. And every single time you have to validate new transactions because obviously everybody's mempool is now heterogeneous, containing different set of transactions. So it increases the overheads of the mining pool, right? If the mining pool itself is creating the block template, then it becomes very easy for the mining pool to validate that block template because that block template will never have any transaction that the pool is already not aware of. But if the miners are creating their own templates, hundreds and thousands of miners all creating their own templates, it becomes very difficult for the mining pool to validate the shares because the mining pool will have to validate those transactions individually that are available in the mempools of the miners and not available in its own mempool, which increases the overheads, right? So this can make it expensive for the pool to validate minor shares. Each share can contain up to several megabytes of transactions that the pool has never seen before, right? Uh, Bitcoin Core's default mempool size is 300 MB, right? So it is possible that the number of transactions, like let's say if 10% of the transactions in the mempool of a miner are different as compared to the transactions in the mempool of the mining pool, then maybe approximately 30 megabytes of data will have to be validated by the mining pool. And if there are 1,000 uh, miners that a mining pool is working with, then it will probably have to validate 30,000 MB of data, maybe, and every second, or maybe even more than that, multifolds of that every second, right? This can easily overwhelm the pool's infrastructure, affecting its ability to accept shares from honest users. Pools can avoid this problem by only validating share proof of work, skipping transaction validation, but that allows a pool miner to collect payment for submitting invalid shares 100% of the time, which is slightly worse than the approximately 99.9% of the time they can collect payment from a classic block withholding attack. Okay. Now, one mitigation for this, we discuss what the problem is, right? We discuss what the problems or what the bottlenecks or what the trade-offs are of template creation when the miners are creating their own templates. Okay, one mitigation that the author here suggests is what, instead of validating the entire block, we only validate the proof of work. We only validate the proof of work, right? And if we are sure that a block has adequate proof of work, such that it can be appended to the blockchain, it has a reached a difficulty level which is greater than the difficulty level of the network. Only then will we validate each and every transaction, right? So every block that has a share, but it is not a valid block, meaning it does not have difficulty adequate enough for it to be appended to the blockchain, we will not look into each and every transaction. Okay, so every time a miner furnishes a block, we will just see whether the amount of work done by the miner is of this ratio, is greater than the pool threshold. If it is greater than the pool threshold, then we pay. Then we pay them, right? We don't validate that each and every transaction, right? Because anyhow, that block is not going to get appended to the blockchain. That block only has adequate difficulty for the miner to get compensated. It's a valid share, but it does not have adequate difficulty to get appended to the blockchain. So we just pay the miner, we just validate that, hey, you've done adequate work, here's your compensation, but we're not interested in validating each and every transaction because anyhow your block is not going to get appended to the blockchain, right? That is one way of mitigating it so that you circumvent the overheads of validating each and every transaction, skipping transaction validation. But that allows a pool miner to collect payment for submitting invalid shares. All right. Now, the flip side of the coin is that a miner can mine invalid transactions and still create a valid share, right? It can still create a nonce which is greater than the difficulty level stipulated by the pool, right? It will be an invalid block, but it can contain a nonce that has a valid share. So as a miner, you can create an invalid block, meaning having invalid transactions. And obviously, if you have invalid transactions, your block is never going to get dependent to the blockchain, right? So you are creating an invalid block and just showing to the mining pool that, hey, I have a nonce which is greater than the difficulty level that you have stipulated, so pay me. And the miner, since the miner is not validating each and every transaction, even if it's invalid block, the miner has no way of figuring out that you are sharing an invalid block. The miner will only look at the difficulty level that your block produces. Even if it's an invalid block, if it has a valid share, the miner will pay you, right? So this is the flip side. If we say that, okay, fine, we will not validate each and every transaction for a block that does not have adequate difficulty to be appended to the blockchain, as long as it produces a valid share, we just pay the miner and move on, so that we don't have to validate each and every transaction. If you say that, then this opens up the door for miners to create blocks with invalid shares, because you're not validating transactions now. So this is the flip side of the coin. This incentivizes pools to either forbid client transaction selection or require that pool miners use a persistent public identity. All right. So to mitigate this, what is a possibility? The pools might get turned off. The pools might get turned off, right? The pools might not allow individual miners to create their own block templates. The pools might not allow individual miners to create their own block templates, because if this becomes the norm that people are using this avenue to create invalid blocks and and reaping benefits despite having invalid blocks, then what the pools will do, the pool will not allow, they will close this door and they will close this avenue of allowing miners to create their own blocks. That could be one outcome of this exploitation, which we don't want to happen, right? In fact, we want more and more people to create their own templates. Or the second option could be what the mining pools might ask the miners to do KYC. So they know exactly what your IP address is. They can link your IP address with your identity, and they know who are the bad actors, and they can ban those bad actors. Ideally, we don't want any of these situations. We don't want mining pools to prevent the miners from creating their own block templates. At the same time, we don't want mining pools to make KYC a prerequisite, right? We want the miners to create their own block templates, and we want the miners to remain anonymous, not have to share their identities, right? So these two solutions, they should ideally be ruled out, right? One solution Town proposes is pools to provide multiple block templates, allowing each miner to choose their preferred template. This is similar to the existing system used by Ocean Pool. Shares submitted based on pool created templates can be validated quickly and with a minimum amount of bandwidth. This prevents the invalid shares attack that pays 100% but does not help with the approximately 99.9% profitable block withholding attack. Okay, one solution. So we discussed two solutions, right? We discussed two solutions. One is that uh, the pools will have to ban template creation, which we don't want to happen. The second solution could be making KYC compulsory so that people who are creating invalid shares and exploiting the avenue of template creation, their identities are known. We don't even want that to happen. We want miners to remain anonymous. The third option could be pool. Instead of giving, like currently what happens is that pools just have one template, right? Pools just have one template and they give you that template and they tell you to mine that template. Okay. Now something better than that, something between template creation, something between miners creating their own templates and the pool creating its own templates. Like, is there a middle path, right? The one extreme is that only the mining pool has the authority to create a template. Okay. And complete decentralization is where every miner has the right to create their own template, right? Now, can we find a middle path? There is also a middle path, which is that the mining pool will give the miners options of choosing between different templates, right? So the mining pool can have four, five, six different templates and give you an option. So earlier, the mining pools had only one template. You had to choose that template itself. Either you choose that template or the pool will not let you mine with it. Now, something like an intermediate level of decentralization would be that instead of just having one block template, the mining pool can have four, five, six block templates and then tell the miner, hey, choose from these, right? So you can choose the template that suits you. Maybe the mining pool creates templates using different clients. Maybe the mining pool creates templates using different node policies. Maybe the mining pool creates templates using different relay policies. Okay, so they give you an option that, hey, we're not forcing you to use our template. We're giving you an option of four templates or five templates or 10 templates. All right, you choose whichever template you want to choose out of these 10. Okay, and the mining pool will run nodes of all those templates. So no matter what template you choose, the mining pool will always be aware of every single transaction that is in your template. So this reduces the overheads of what this reduces the overheads of transaction validation that we discussed above, right? This reduces the overheads of transaction validation here because the pool itself has created that set or that cluster of templates. So the pool already knows all the transactions in that template. And another mitigation that it comes out is that the miner cannot create an invalid block. The miner cannot induce an invalid transaction in that block, right? Because it's the pool that's creating the template. Even though the pool is creating a set of templates, but all the templates are created by the pool. So the miner can never broadcast an invalid block. Okay, so this rules out the 100% invalid share attack that we talked about here. Okay, so this is like a middle way that Ocean Pool started. Okay, it's like not absolutely decentralized and it's not completely centralized. It's in the middle, like giving the miners an option at least of choosing between three, four, five candidate block templates. Okay, to address the block withholding attack, Towns updates an idea originally proposed by Manny Rosenfield in 2011 that describes how a conceptually a simple hard fork could prevent a pool miner from knowing whether any particular share had enough proof of work to be valid block, making them oblivious shares. An attacker who can't discriminate between valid block proof of work and share proof of work can only deprive a pool of valid block income at the same rate the attacker deprives themselves of share income. To approach has downsides. Okay, so up till now we've discussed firstly how mining pool centralized mining pool create their own block templates and force the miners to mine those templates. Then we talked about how there are certain tools, there are certain protocols that allow the miners to create their own block templates. Okay. Then we also discussed what could be the trade-offs of miners creating their own templates, right? And then we discussed a few mitigations of those trade-offs, right? But we came to the conclusion that all of these trade-offs, or all of these mitigations, not trade-offs, all of these mitigations that we talked about have some loophole or the other, right? If we go by mitigation one, that is we completely ban the miners from creating their own templates, then we head towards absolute centralization. If we force the miners to do KYC, then that again deprives them of their privacy and their anonymity. If we uh, if we what was the third one? Yeah, again, yeah, if we allow the miners to choose from a set of templates, right, then this circumvents a lot of problems, but again it does not get rid of this one, the 99.9% attack, or that which we refer to as the block withholding attack that we talked about, right? Is there a solution that helps us get off all the problems, right? Such that miners can create their own block templates, and miners can also remain anonymous, and miners can also not share invalid blocks. So there is a proposal known as oblivious shares, and this proposal I think is as old as 2011 or 2013. There's also a research paper written on this if any of you are interested in reading it. Okay, what are oblivious shares? The miner, every single time the miner hashes the block, the miner will not get to know the amount of difficulty that the block has produced, right? So the miner will not get to know whether it is a block that has adequate difficulty that makes it eligible to be appended on the blockchain or no, right? Earlier, what was happening is that every single time the miner hashes a candidate block, the miner gets to know what amount of difficulty the block is reaching, right? So if it's above the network difficulty, the miner will withhold that block, and that is what we call the block withholding attack. And if it's below that difficulty, the miner will broadcast it, right? So every single time the miner produces a valid share, the miner gets compensated. But every single time the miner produces a valid block, which can be appended on the blockchain, the miner does not broadcast it and deprive the mining pool of the share. What do oblivious shares do? They prevent, I mean, they keep this information confidential. So if you're a miner, you are mining every single time you hash the candidate block, you don't get to know the difficulty, you don't get to know whether the difficulty is above the pool level, whether the difficulty is above the network level, whether it's a valid share, whether it's a valid block. You don't get to know any of those information, so you can't hide uh, uh, as per your convenience, right? You can't hide because you don't even know if it's a valid share, right? Earlier, what you were doing is 99% of the time you were broadcasting the share, 0.1% of the time you were hiding that share. But now, because you don't know what difficulty that share is producing, you can't hide that. You can't choose that 0.1% with certainty and hide it, right? So you can't intentionally deprive the mining pool of their share of reward. All right. So this is what oblivious shares is right. Okay. It's a proposal. It can only be done using a hard fork because you have to make changes to the block header. The block header has a nonce, and when you look at that nonce, you get to know whether it's a valid block, whether it's an invalid block. So a hard fork will have to be executed to make changes to the anatomy for Bitcoin blocks such that that information is hidden from the miners. The miners don't get access to the nonce and the difficulty level. Okay, that is one mitigation. But because it's a hard fork, and hard forks in Bitcoin are not easy to pull off, not desirable as well, not desirable as well. Okay, and that is why it's just been discussed for the past 10 years and it's never happened. Okay, so yeah, that's let's just read this quickly. Okay, we've covered what we had to. Then we'll move on to other questions and answers pertaining this specific topic. We'll just read what's remaining from this news article. Okay, so SPV-visible hard fork. All hard fork proposals require all full nodes to upgrade. However, many proposals, such as simple block size increase proposals like the Con03, do not require upgrades of lightweight clients that use simplified payment validation. This proposal changes how the block header field is interpreted, and so would require all lightweight clients to also upgrade. Towns does offer an alternative that wouldn't necessarily require light clients to upgrade, but it would reduce the security significantly, right? So one reason why this hard fork has not happened and why hard forks are not really desirable, because it needs every single, unlike soft fork, right? When it's a hard fork, every single node needs to upgrade. okay, to be compatible, to be a part of the network. If you don't upgrade, you're not a part of the network. Okay, there might be edge cases, but as a thumb rule, you're not a part of the network anymore, right? And that is why it's something that is difficult to pull off. Okay, so Anthony Towns did suggest an alternative, but that executing that alternative will compromise the security of SPV clients, meaning the light wallets. Requires pool miners to use a private template from the pool. Not only would a template be required to prevent the 100% invalid shares attack, but the pool would need to keep that template secret from pool miners until all shares generated using that template were received. The pool could use that trick to the pool could use that to trick miners into producing proof of work. Okay. The second mitigation would be that the pool creates a template and the pool keeps it sorry, private. Okay. The pool will create a template, but the pool will not share it with the miners. So the miner will not even know what template they're mining. So they cannot hide the share when it's valid and not hide the share when it's invalid, right? Requires share submission. One of the advantages of Stratum V2 in certain operating modes is that an honest pool miner who finds a block for the pool can immediately broadcast it to the Bitcoin P2P network, allowing it to begin propagating even before the corresponding share has reached the pool server. With oblivious shares, the share would need to be received by the pool and converted into a full block before it could broadcast, right? So another issue with these oblivious shares. Okay, so these are basically the bottlenecks for oblivious shares. Why are we not having oblivious shares? Other than the fact that it's a hard fork, there are these drawbacks. Okay, one more is that what happens currently if you are creating your own template, the moment you find a valid block, you can broadcast it to the entire network, right? So there are two networks basically, or two protocols that work in tandem. One is miners. Okay, one is a gossip protocol where miners communicate with each other. It's known as fiber, and the other is a regular P2P network on which non-mining nodes interact with each other. When you've created your own template, if you find a valid block, you can broadcast it through the P2P network as well, right? So the gossiping happens quickly. But with oblivious shares, since it's only the mining pools that can validate that block, you will have to share it with the mining pool first. The mining pool will validate that block, and then the mining pool will announce it to the other nodes. So it kind of increases the overheads of validating the block, and it enhances the overheads of reaching consensus. Okay, so this is what this article was about. It basically talked about how currently the block creation is centralized, how there are certain tools that allow you to create, that allow individual miners to create their own templates. What are the overheads or the bottlenecks of the trade-offs of each miner creating their own template? How can we mitigate them partially and how can we mitigate them completely? And the fact that the mechanism that mitigates them completely would require a hard fork. And what are the trade-offs of a hard fork? And what's the reason why we've not had a hard fork up till yet. So this is a very comprehensive article that talks in detail about mining. So yeah, we've covered it and given it adequate attention, I feel. If there are any questions pertaining what we've talked about so far and the concepts covered in this news article, then please feel free to unmute yourself and speak. And if there are any questions in the chat section, then let me check it. Cool. No questions. Anybody, any questions? Anything to share? Anything to ask? Let me know before we move forward. Cool. If none, then we'll also take the second a news article because it has a slight correlation with what we've talked about recently, right? We've talked about how miners creating their own templates can have trade-offs, and the fact that that would lead to an additional overhead for the mining pools while they are validating shares, and how they will have to validate each and every transaction in the candidate block that is created and broadcasted by the miners, which the mining pool might not already be aware of, right? And this might also happen. This issue is not confined to the mining pools. This can happen throughout the network, right? If every single person is running a node with their own custom policies, which it will lead to a heterogeneous mempools, right? Every node runner will have its own mempool. This is a very ideal situation. Okay, it's not something that is disparaging. As the node runner, you're a sovereign individual. You are absolutely entitled to decide what transactions enter your mempool and what transactions don't, right? But again, with it also come overheads, right? If every node runner on the network has a heterogeneous pool, then that leads to the overheads of what block validation, right? Every single time valid block is found, it might happen that there might be a lot of transactions in that block which you are not already aware of, and then you will have to individually validate those transactions and then validate that block. So it adds to the overheads of synchronization on the blockchain, right? We ideally want, the moment a block is found, we ideally want consensus to be reached as quickly as possible to avoid hard forks, right? But this the fact that every node runner can now have its own mempool, it kind of adds to the overheads of blockchain synchronization and opens up avenues for chain splits, right? So this is also another article that touches the same topic. Let's read through it and delve into it further. And we're at 8:46. It's been 40 minutes. I think this is the last thing we'll be able to cover, and maybe something small about the Lightning Network, and then uh, we'll probably call it quits for the session. Statistics on compact block reconstruction. Developer B10C posted to Delving Bitcoin about the recent reliability of compact block reconstruction. Many relaying full nodes have been using BIP152 compact block relay since the feature was added to Bitcoin Core 0.13.0 in 2016. This allows two peers that have already shared some unconfirmed transactions to use a short reference to those transactions when they are confirmed in the new block rather than retransmitting the entire transaction. This significantly reduces bandwidth and by doing so also reduces latency, allowing new blocks to propagate more quickly. Okay. I'm assuming most people know what a compact block is. We've talked about compact blocks in a detail in the preceding sessions, okay? But just to brush up on what compact blocks are, every single time a miner finds a valid block, okay, a miner finds a valid block, that block is broadcasted to the entire network, right? Because all the miners are constantly hashing, right? Once a block is found, that block is broadcasted to all the miners and also to all the non-mining nodes, all right, so that the entire network comes to a consensus on the latest state of the blockchain. Okay, now usually what happens is that statistically it's been observed that almost 99 to 98% of the transactions are known to all the nodes on the network, right? So if a certain miner finds a valid block and they propagate or they broadcast or they announce that block which they have mined successfully to the network, as the node runner, if you are adhering to default policies of the most popular Bitcoin client, which is Bitcoin Core right now, I think 98% of the network currently runs Bitcoin Core, and I believe the overwhelming majority of node runners just stick to default policies. Okay, so you can be rest assured that almost 95% of the nodes that are running, 95% of the Bitcoin nodes that are running on the Bitcoin network right now have the same looking mempool. They have the same looking mempool. Okay, so whenever a new block is found, 98 to 99% of the transactions, maybe even 100% of the transactions in that block are already known to your node. If you're a node runner, they are already known to your node, right? So there is no point in validating those transactions again. All right. So BIP 152, what does BIP 152 does? I clicked on it accidentally. What does BIP 152 do? So instead of validating each and every transaction again, okay, a compact block is shared. What's a compact block? Okay, in a regular block, if you go to the Bitcoin blockchain right now, okay, and you have a look at the block, if you have a look at any block, you can just go to mempool.space or any blockchain explorer, okay, and just look at any block. What does the block contain? A block contains nothing but transaction IDs, right? It just contains, it is full of transactions. I'm not talking about the header right now, right? The body of the block contains only transactions, right? And those transactions are 32 byte representations of a Bitcoin transaction, right? So you double SHA-256 a Bitcoin transaction. That is the TX ID of that transaction. So a block is nothing but it's a data structure that contains the TX ID of the transaction, but that's 32 bytes, right? So 99 to 100% of the transactions that are in a block that has been mined are already in your mempool. So what's the point in going in and then validating each and every transaction, right? 32 byte, 32 byte, 32 byte, 32 byte, right? Because more or less 99 to 100% of the transactions are already known to you. So we have this concept of compact blocks where instead of having 32 byte transactions, we have transactions that are as small as I believe six bytes. Okay, 6 bytes. They are known as short transaction ID. So instead of using SHA-256, we use another cryptographic algorithm that reduces the size of a transaction. I think it's six bits or 6 bytes. I can't recall it right now. All right. So don't take my word on it. It's 6 bits or it's 6 bytes. So every single time a block is mined, okay, and you get to know about it, you want to propagate that information to your peers on the network, right? So instead of propagating that block itself, you will propagate a compact block. Okay, the block itself has 32 bytes of TXID, right? You will not propagate the block, you'll propagate a compact block. What's a compact block? A compact block is very small in size. It contains all of those transactions, but those transactions are not in the form of 32 byte TXIDs, they are in the form of 6 bits, I believe. They're in the form of 6 bits, short IDs, okay? So the node only has to validate that 6 bits of data and not 32 bytes. Okay. So what the node will do is that it will hash on the transactions in its mempool using the same cryptographic algorithm and compare the short ID that it has in its mempool now with the IDs in the compact block. Okay. And if the IDs match, then it will just convert it into 32 byte equivalent and populate the node. Okay. So instead of validating 32 bytes of data for every transaction, you now only have to validate 6 bits of transaction. Okay. So it reduces the overheads of block validation by 99%. Okay. So you don't have to broadcast the entire block, you just broadcast compact blocks, which do not contain the 32 byte representation of the entire transaction. They contain 6 bit short IDs of the transaction. So the overheads of validating the transaction becomes very low. Okay. But this works only as long as the mempools are homogeneous. The mempools are homogeneous, right? So if you are running a node and I'm running a node, okay, both of us have the same mempool policies. Our mempools look exactly the same, and you found a block, you will share the compact block with me. Obviously, because our mempools look the same, each and every transaction or that compact block will also be present in my mempool, right? I just have to tally the short IDs and then convert each transaction into its 32 byte equivalent, right? But what if our mempools look different? Okay, what if our mempools look different? What if you are running a different Bitcoin client, I'm running a different Bitcoin client, or you are running a different version and I'm running a different version, or you have different mempool policies and I have different mempool policies, and our mempools are heterogeneous, they look different. In that case, if you share a compact block to me and let's say 50% of the transactions in my mempool are different than the transactions in your mempool, and you find a block and you broadcast it to me, I will still have to individually validate those 50% transactions, right? I cannot I cannot refer to the compact block IDs, right? So the 50% transactions that are common between your mempool and my mempool, the compact block short IDs are fine, okay? But those transactions which I have in my mempool and you don't have in your mempool, the short IDs will not do. I will have to ask you for the entire transaction because my mempool is not aware of it, okay? So the added benefit of compact blocks is kind of diminished if each and every node runner is running a node with a different mempool policy, right? With a different mempool policy. So is each and every miner is creating their own template and they have different mempool policies. And if one of those miners finds a block and they broadcast that block, compact blocks, the 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 benefits of compact blocks are diminished. Why? Because now everybody has a heterogeneous pool. So these short IDs will be of no avail, right? So you will have to ask the other miner individually for the transactions that it had in its mempool and you did not have in its mempool. So the added advantage of compact blocks is diminished exponentially. If everybody could mute themselves, please. I think somebody is. Who is it? Okay, it's Basanta. When he comes, he makes his presence felt. Either he doesn't come, when he comes, then everybody should know that Basanta is here. Cool. Okay, all right. Yeah. So yeah. So this was happening recently due to a reason. What was this happening? Let's read it. Developer B10C posted to Delving Bitcoin about the recent reliability of compact block reconstruction. Many relaying full nodes have been using BIP 152 compact block relay since the feature was added to Bitcoin Core 0.13.0 in 2016. This allows two peers that have already shared some unconfirmed transactions to use a short reference to those transactions when they are confirmed in a new block rather than retransmitting the entire transaction, right? So if two nodes have a homogeneous mempool, if they have same set of transactions in their mempools, if one of if and they're both miners, let's say, and if one finds a block, then they can just relay the compact block using the short IDs. They don't have to relay the actual block, or they don't have to relay the actual 32 byte representation and validate the transaction again, right? This allows two peers that have already shared some unconfirmed transactions to use a short reference to those transactions when they are confirmed in a new block rather than retransmitting the entire transaction. This significantly reduces bandwidth and by doing so also reduces latency, allowing new blocks to propagate more quickly. Faster propagation of new blocks decreases the number of accidental blockchain forks. Fewer forks reduces the amount of proof of work that is wasted and reduces the number of block races that benefit larger mining pools over small pools, helping to make Bitcoin more secure and more decentralized. So, what is the added advantage of having compact blocks? Okay, we discussed that compact blocks help the network to come to consensus quickly, right? Because the moment a block is found, ideally we want all the participants of the network, all the node runners to get to know about that block as quickly as possible so that a consensus is reached, right? We don't want there to be a lag in the network. And especially if you're a mining node, if you're a miner, then you even have monetary incentive, right? If you're not a miner, then then you ideally want to be in sync with the network. But if you're a miner, then you more so want to be rapidly in sync with the latest state of the blockchain because you have monetary incentives now attached to it because you don't want to do redundant work. If your mempool has a set of transactions which you have included in your candidate block in your mining, and those transactions have already been mined by another miner, you are just doing redundant work, right? Your computational efforts are of absolutely no avail. So there is a parallel network known as fiber, which is used by miners to propagate information with each other, right? As we say, Bitcoin is a decentralized peer-to-peer network, right? So there is this network that is specific to nodes, non-mining nodes, where non-mining nodes gossip with each other. But because the mining nodes even more so need to be in sync with each other more quickly because they have monetary incentives, they have a parallel network known as fiber where they communicate with each other. Okay, so what compact blocks do is that they ensure that all the participants on the network are aware about the latest state of the blockchain as quickly as possible. And what does the this does is that it circumvents block races, right? Because larger mining pools, if basically a miner mines a block, the miner knows it before the rest of the network, right? It's incumbent. If I'm a miner, if I mine a valid block, then I know it before everybody else in the world does, right? So I can immediately start mining the next block. And by the time other people know, I have an added advantage. You generally don't want that to happen. If the other mining nodes get to know that one miner has mined the block, if it takes time, even if it's a few seconds, then the miner that has already found the block will get an added incentive, right? Because if there is a lag, then by the time other mining nodes get to know that a valid block has found, this miner already has an added advantage. You don't want that to happen. That is what compact blocks mitigate. And it reduces the number of block races, right? It reduces the number of block races. Block races can lead to hard forks. I'm assuming everybody knows what a block race is. However, sometimes new blocks include transactions that a node has not seen before. In that case, the node receiving a compact block usually needs to request those transactions from the sending peer and then wait for the peer to respond. This slows down block propagation until the node has all of the transactions in a block. That block can't be validated or relayed to peers. This increases the frequency of accidental blockchain forks, reduces proof of work security, and increases centralization pressure. Okay, so if every single person on the network is creating their own block templates, then there might be a situation like we discussed that people will have heterogeneous pools. People will have heterogeneous pools. And when a valid block is found, then you will have to validate those transactions which are not in your pool individually. And this leads to overheads, right? So you will have to ask your peers for those transactions. Okay. All the transactions that are not in your node and are included in the valid block, you will have to manually ask your peers for that transaction. Okay. And you will like the peer that shares the compact block with you, you will ask that peer for transactions. You will ask that peer for transactions and you will wait for, I believe, 10 minutes. The current default value in Bitcoin Core right now is 10 minutes. So if a miner finds a block, okay, and 50% of the transactions are not in that block, you will have to ask your peer for those 50% of transactions. Okay, and you will have to wait for ideally 10 minutes. Not ideally, the default value is 10 minutes. So you will have to wait for 10 minutes for that peer to respond and share the 50%, in our example, transactions that are missing from your mempool. So imagine a node being on a network and that node cannot validate the block and sync up with the existing state of the blockchain for 10 minutes. It's only after 10 minutes that you can ask another peer. Although recently this article is outdated, recently another change has been made in Bitcoin Core where you can ask your outbound peers. I believe you can have 8 outbound peers by default, and you can ask all 8 of those outbound peers. You don't have to wait for 10 minutes for that one peer to respond. You can ask all 8 of your outbound peers, right? So yeah, basically what this does is that this adds latency to the network. For that reason, it's useful to monitor how often compound blocks provide all of the information necessary to immediately validate a new block with no additional transactions needing to be requested, called a successful reconstruction. Gregory Maxwell recently reported a decrease in successful reconstructions for nodes running Bitcoin Core with its default settings, especially when compared to a node running with mempoolful RBF configuration setting enabled. Okay, what's mempoolful RBF? It basically means that every transaction by default is replaceable. Okay, so like stage one during the early days is that you had to signal for replaceability, right? You had this field known as n sequence where you had to specify a certain value of n sequence. If it was below that value, then your transaction was replaceable. Then we had a second stage where we had BIP 125, where a transaction needed to comply with the BIP 125 policies, meaning it had to pay a higher absolute fee and it had to pay a higher fee rate to replace a transaction, okay, a conflicting transaction. And now we've come to stage three, where we have this thing known as mempool full RBF, where a transaction is unequivocally and unconditionally replaceable. Like you don't have to signal, right? You don't have to signal while you create a transaction. You don't have to signal that this transaction is replaceable. If you just set this mempool full RBF equals to 1 in your bitcoin.conf file, then every single transaction that you create using your node that has that policy is replaceable, and all the miners were using this, right? This feature by default was switched off in Bitcoin Core. There is another client maintained by Peter Todd known as Libre Relay, and there is another client maintained by Luke Dasher known as Bitcoin Knots. These two clients, I believe, since 2014 have had mempool full RBF on by default, but Bitcoin Core had it off by default, and majority of the miners had it on by default. Okay, because this is incentivizing to the miners. The miners ideally want to select transactions that are paying them higher fee, right? So the miners were running nodes that allowed them that had templates which had mempool full RBF on by default. Okay, but since Bitcoin Core's default policy was that mempool full RBF was off by default, there was a discrepancy in the templates of there was a discrepancy in the templates in the mempool of the non-mining nodes and the mining nodes, right? Because the non-mining nodes were using mempool full RBF off by default, but the mining nodes were using mempool full RBF on by default. So every time the mining nodes found a valid block, there were a lot of transactions in that block which the non-mining nodes were not aware of, and then the non-mining nodes had to individually validate those transactions, and only after they validated those individual transactions can they validate the block and get in sync with the current state of the network. So there was this, I think, statistical research done by Maxwell to see the impact of this. Okay, and owing to this, recently mempool for RBF is on by default in Bitcoin Core. I think Bitcoin Core 28.0, which was, I believe, launched after this article, or at least the latest version of Bitcoin 28.x, whatever it is. Currently, if you go to Bitcoin Core's repository and you download the master branch, mempool for RBF is on by default, and this is one of the reasons why it was switched on by default. It was switched on by default because majority of the mining nodes were keeping it on, and majority of the non-mining nodes were keeping it off, leading to there being a discrepancy between the mempool of the mining nodes and the non-mining nodes, thereby leading to additional overheads by the non-mining nodes to validate the blocks. All right. So this is a research that was done by BTNC, who's known for his the research pertaining to the blockchain, and I believe some simulations that were run by Gregory Maxwell as well to see the impact of this. And eventually, I think it is this article that convinced, I'm assuming, Bitcoin Core developers to now keep mempool full RBF on by default. And currently, mempool full RBF is on by default, thereby reducing the overheads of validating a block that is mined by mining pool by non-mining nodes. All right. That is what this article talked about how compact block construction reduces the overheads of block validation. However, this was being impacted by the fact that the mining nodes had different mempool policies and the non-mining node had different mempool policies. The mining nodes were using mempool full RBF on by default, but the non-mining nodes, which were running Bitcoin Core with its default policies, which is, I believe, more than 90% of the network, were using mempool full RBF off by default, which led to a heterogeneous mempool of the mining nodes and the non-mining nodes, which was dwindling the impact of compact blocks and adding to the overheads of block validation. And now, since we have mempool for RBF on by default for Bitcoin Core and also for other clients, it basically enhances the functionality of compact blocks and leads to quick sync time of the blockchain. These are the two articles that we were able to cover in this session, and the session was entirely dedicated to mining, to basically we talked about block withholding attack, we talked about what oblivious shares are, we talked about clients that allow decentralized block creation, we talked about what a valid share is, what a valid block is, the difference between a valid share and a valid block. We talked about what could be the consequences of sharing invalid blocks. We talked about their potential mitigations. We talked about their absolute mitigations that would lead to a hard fork and the drawbacks and the trade-offs that come with a hard fork. We talked about how having heterogeneous mempool policies between the mining and the non-mining nodes would lead to added overheads in block validation, and how Bitcoin Core recently went to mempool full RBF on by default, thereby mitigating a bottleneck that was prevalent and studied by Gregory Maxwell in Beaton C, which is now being mitigated since after this pull request, mempool full RBF is on by default. It's an upcoming version here because this was, I believe, in August. Now the current version has mempool full RBF on by default. That is all that we had to share from our end. Or I will now stop sharing my screen. If anybody has any questions pertaining to what we've covered today or in general about mining, please feel free to ask. We'll try our best to entertain your questions. That is it from my end. There's something in the chat. Let me read it. Is block trace? No, not block trace. It's block race. Not block trace. Block race. What's a block race? Hello, Gooden. When two miners find a block at the same time, it's a block race. So you are a miner. You are mining with pool A. I am a miner. I'm mining with pool B. Both of us find a valid block at the same time. So both of us will broadcast it to the network, right? So my peers will start broadcasting and gossiping my block, and your peers or your nodes will start broadcasting your block. Okay, and then there'll be a race. If the majority of the nodes on the network broadcast my block, then my block will be appended to the blockchain and your block will be rejected. And the majority of the nodes on the network gossip and broadcast your block, then your block gets appended to the blockchain and my block gets discarded. So when two miners find a valid block at the same time and they propagate it across the network at the same time, that's known as a block race. Both of those blocks are racing to reach consensus, and the miner that is more connected, that has more number of nodes relaying, will obviously spread that information to the wider section of the nodes, and they'll win the race, right? So that's a block race. What does it depend on? What decides whether majority node will prefer one or the other? It's simple. Like if you are connected to more nodes, then more nodes will share the block that you have received. It's there's no algorithm or math to it. It's like pretty straightforward. If I'm connected to more number of nodes, then they'll broadcast it more. It's just like it's a gossiping network, right? The more number of gossipers that you're connected with, the farther your gossip will go. As simple as that. If you're connected with 100 gossipers, your gossip will reach more number of people. If I'm connected with 10 gossipers, my gossip will reach less number of people. So the more connected you are to the network, the more your block will be gossiped, and your block will win the race. Proof of reputation? No, it has nothing to do with the reputation. A valid block is a valid block, as simple as that. The Bitcoin network, the Bitcoin consensus recognizes no reputation. If you find a valid block, or if Peter Wohlers find a valid block, it doesn't matter. It's just a valid block. Would the proof of work of both competing blocks okay, so it has to be above the network difficulty. Okay, so we discussed about an arbitrary number, right? Let's say that I'm answering VTC noob. Okay, let's assume that the difficulty is 1,000. It's just an arbitrary number, right? So any block that has a difficulty above 1,000 is a valid block. It does not matter whether your block has a difficulty of 1,001 or whether it has a difficulty of 2,000. Doesn't matter at all. As long as it's above 1,000, it is a valid block. There is no difference between a block having difficulty 1,001 and a block having this difficulty 1,500, right? A block having difficulty 1,500 will get no precedence over a block having difficulty 1,001. As long as it's above the network difficulty, it's a valid block, period, end of. Okay, so if you have to get 20 zeros in your nonce, it doesn't matter whether you get 21 zeros or 30 zeros, they're both the same. What
Somewhere
context I'm not
I
able to
have,
figure out.
Faisal, somewhere I have read that in such a kind of contesting, so the chain which will be having the higher number of proof of work would be considered over the lesser one. So will that algorithm act here?
So no, that is not a block race situation. That is basically if there's a chain split, the situation happens if there's a chain split, right? And that is what I mean. If you're connected with more people, the chances of you having more proof of work is greater. The chances of you having more proof of work is greater. Okay. So if I'm connected with X number of nodes, and if you're connected with X plus 10 number of nodes, right? It means X number of nodes will append your block to the blockchain, and X plus 10 number of nodes will append my block to the blockchain, right? And X plus 10 nodes are now considering my block as valid, and X nodes are now considering your block as valid, right? So the chances of my chain getting the next block is higher because I have more gossipers in the network, right? And I have more mining nodes as well, ideally attached to my chain. So the chances of me finding the next block is higher. Okay, so like I said, it's not certain. It's not certain, but the more connected you are with the network, the higher is the chances that your chain will have higher proof of work. Because if you're more connected with the network, it means you are ideally more connected with more miners. It means more miners are mining on top of your chain. So the possibility of a miner mining on top of your chain is higher. It's absolutely possible that even if you're connected with few nodes, you might find the next block, and the one connected with more nodes will not find the next block, right? It's absolutely possible. So if if I'm connected with 1,000 people and you're connected with 100 people, it's possible that the 100 people that you're connected with will find the next block on top of that, right? We are competing now, but it's just that if you're more connected, then you have more chances of finding the chain that has more proof of work. That's it. It's not certain, but the probability is high. RBF is enabled by default in the new release. That's why CodingP has shared the release notes of the Bitcoin 28 version. Okay, yeah, maybe, right. Yes, RBF. So it goes in stages, right? It goes in stages. Like mempool for RBF was there. But it was switched off by. I mean, initially mempool for RBF was only opt-in. You have to opt in for the specific transaction. It wasn't like there's nothing you can do to ensure that all the transactions that you're broadcasting are mempool for RBF, right? When you are creating a transaction, you have to specify in the anatomy of the transaction that the transaction is eligible for full RBF. That's Web 125 compliability or compliance. Okay. The second stage was that Bitcoin Core introduced an mempool full RBF flag, meaning if you keep it on, then you can replace all your transactions. If you keep it off, then you can't replace your transactions, right? Okay, but it was off by default. Then the third stage was keeping it on by default. Now, if you want to switch it off, you have to switch it off manually. But you can keep. But if you're using the default version, then it's on by default. So, like I said, there's another client called Liberal Relay, which is maintained by Peter Todd. I believe since 2013, he has had mempool full RBF on by default. And there's another client known as Bitcoin Knots, maintained by Luke Dasher. Both of these clients had mempool full RBF on by default. They are both forks of Core, but they had on by default. But Core never had it. Core then had off by default, and now it also has on by default. Okay, I guess nothing else to discuss now. Cool. Thanks a lot, guys, for showing up. Nothing else to add from my end.